Story number 1. Whispers Behind the Wall. Moving to Chicago was supposed to be a fresh start for us. Laura and I, along with our 2 children, Emma and Jake, were eager to leave behind the chaos of our old lives in Ohio. The promise of a vibrant city, bustling with opportunities and new experiences, was too enticing to pass up. When we found the charming 3-bedroom house on Elm Street, its affordable price and spacious backyard sealed the deal. Little did we know, the house held secrets that would unravel our peace in the most horrifying ways. From the moment we stepped inside, the house felt welcoming. The hardwood floors creaked softly under our footsteps, and sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting warm patterns on the walls. We spent the first few days unpacking, decorating, and settling into our new routine. Laura enjoyed setting up the children's rooms, while I focused on making the basement functional as a home office and play area. One evening, after a long day of moving and unpacking, Laura mentioned hearing strange noises coming from the basement. At first, we dismissed it as the house settling or perhaps the children playing a little too energetically. However, as days turned into weeks, the noises became more persistent. Soft thuds, distant whispers, and the occasional creak of old wood disrupted our nights, making it difficult to sleep. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to investigate the basement. Equipped with a flashlight and a sense of determination, I made my way downstairs one chilly November night. The basement was exactly as I had envisioned, spacious, with ample room for a home office and storage. However, there was an unsettling stillness that hung in the air, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. As I explored the basement, my flashlight beam caught something unusual behind a stack of old boxes. A section of the wall seemed slightly ajar, a crack just big enough to peer through. Curiosity piqued, I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Pushing aside the boxes, I discovered a hidden door concealed behind the clutter. It was old, the paint peeling and the hinges rusted, but it clearly hadn't been opened in years. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the handle and slowly pushed the door open. A musty scent wafted out, mingling with the faint odor of mildew. The room beyond was small and cramped, filled with old furniture covered in white sheets and dust-covered relics of a bygone era. In the center stood a wooden desk, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers and a leather-bound diary. Intrigued, I approached the desk and began to examine the contents. The diary belonged to a man named Thomas Mitchell, dated back to the early 1900s. As I flipped through the pages, I was horrified by the entries. Thomas wrote about hearing voices late at night, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He detailed a growing paranoia, believing that unseen forces were watching his every move, compelling him to commit unspeakable acts. One entry stood out. The voices grow louder each night, demanding that I follow their instructions. They promise peace, but all I feel is fear. I must find a way to silence them before they consume me entirely. A chill ran down my spine as I read his desperate pleas. The more I delved into his writings, the more I felt an oppressive presence in the room. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. My breath quickened as I fumbled to turn it back on, but when the beam finally returned, the room was empty. Or so I thought. As I was about to leave, a soft whisper echoed through the room, sending shivers down my spine. "Help us," it murmured, the words barely audible but unmistakably clear. I bolted from the hidden room, racing up the stairs and locking the basement door behind me. My mind raced with questions. Who was Thomas Mitchell, and what had happened in that hidden room? The next day, I shared my discovery with Laura, who was equally disturbed. We decided to delve deeper into the house's history, hoping to uncover more about Thomas Mitchell and the mysterious events documented in his diary. Our research led us to the local library, where we pored over old newspapers and property records. It turned out that the house had a dark past. Thomas Mitchell had been a renowned physician who had treated many patients suffering from tuberculosis during a devastating epidemic. However, rumors swirled about his unorthodox methods and unethical experiments conducted in the basement. One particularly grim story recounted how several patients had disappeared without a trace, their families left to mourn in vain. The basement had been the site of his most controversial experiments, and after a series of unexplained deaths, the house was abandoned for several years before we decided to move in. Armed with this knowledge, we felt a responsibility to address the lingering spirits that seemed trapped within our home. That night, we decided to perform a cleansing ritual, hoping to put Thomas Mitchell's tormented soul and any other restless spirits to rest. We lit candles, burned sage, and recited prayers, our voices echoing through the basement. As we performed the ritual, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The temperature dropped further, and the shadows danced menacingly on the walls. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into anguished cries that filled the air with despair. Suddenly, the hidden room reappeared before us, the diary of Thomas Mitchell lying open on the desk. A spectral figure materialized beside the desk, a translucent apparition of Thomas Mitchell, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Why do you disturb my rest?" he demanded, his voice echoing with a haunting resonance. "We're sorry for what happened," Laura responded, her voice wavering. "We want to help you find peace." Thomas Mitchell's ghostly form began to dissolve, his sorrowful expression softening. "Release us," he whispered, his voice fading into a gentle breeze. "Only then can we move on." As the last of his presence vanished, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a serene calm. The hidden room seemed to fade, the dark shadows retreating into the corners of the basement. Exhausted but hopeful, we knew that our efforts had made a difference. However, peace was not immediately restored. Over the following weeks, the disturbances subsided but did not disappear entirely. The whispers became less frequent, and the unexplained noises were reduced to occasional, faint sounds that no longer instilled fear. It was as if the spirits were slowly finding their way to peace, their presence still lingering but no longer actively tormenting us. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, the silence was broken by the faint sound of a child laughing, a gentle, innocent sound that brought a sense of comfort rather than fear. I glanced at the basement door, half expecting to see Thomas Mitchell watching over us, but the door remained closed, the shadows undisturbed. We decided to stay, feeling a renewed sense of purpose to maintain the peace we had helped create. The house on Elm Street became not just our home but a place of healing, a sanctuary for both the living and the spirits seeking closure. Our experiences in the basement taught us the importance of compassion and understanding, even towards those who could no longer speak for themselves. Years have passed since that harrowing winter, and our lives have flourished within the walls of our once haunted home. Emma and Jake grew up hearing stories of the house's past, learning about the importance of empathy and the impact of unresolved pain. Laura and I continue to share our story, hoping to shed light on the unseen struggles that linger in the shadows of every home. The basement, once a place of fear and despair, now stands as a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the spirits that dwell beyond. The hidden room remains closed, its secrets finally laid to rest, but the lessons we learned continue to resonate in our lives. We learned that sometimes, the most profound connections are forged in the darkest of places, and that compassion can bridge the gap between life and death. If you ever find yourself in an old house with a hidden past, remember our story. Listen to the whispers in the walls, honor the memories of those who came before, and approach the unknown with both courage and empathy. For in the heart of every home lies a story waiting to be told, and sometimes, all it takes to bring peace is someone willing to listen. Story number 2. Whispers in the Waverly Shadows. I never planned to become a ghost hunter. My life in Louisville had been uneventful, a steady job at a local bookstore, weekends spent hiking the trails of Jefferson Memorial Forest, and quiet evenings with Laura, my wife. But curiosity has a way of creeping up on you, much like the shadows that linger long after the sun has set. It was this curiosity that led me to the infamous Waverly Hills Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, a place steeped in history and haunted by the echoes of its tragic past. Waverly Hills was once a bustling tuberculosis sanatorium, a sanctuary for those battling a relentless and deadly disease. In the early 20th century, it treated thousands, its walls bearing witness to countless struggles and sorrows. The hospital was renowned not just for its medical advancements but also for its vast network of tunnels and basements, the infamous death tunnels used to transport the deceased out of the facility. Over the years, stories of restless spirits and unexplained phenomena began to surface, cementing Waverly Hills' reputation as one of America's most haunted locations. My interest in the supernatural was purely academic at first. I had always been fascinated by the thin veil between the living and the dead, by the stories that whispered through the cracks of abandoned buildings. When Laura stumbled upon an article about Waverly Hills while researching our next hiking destination, I decided to dig deeper. The idea of exploring a real haunted site, of experiencing the lingering presence of those who had perished within its walls, was both thrilling and terrifying. We planned our visit for a chilly October weekend, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and a digital voice recorder, we approached the imposing facade of Waverly Hills under a sky heavy with gray clouds. The hospital's Gothic architecture loomed above us, its stone facade weathered by time and neglect. As we entered through the wrought iron gates, the atmosphere shifted, an oppressive silence enveloped us, broken only by the distant sound of our footsteps echoing through the empty courtyard. Inside, the halls were a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, each one holding secrets of lives lost and stories untold. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, a lingering reminder of the countless souls that had walked these halls. We made our way to the entrance of the basement, the heart of Waverly Hills' dark reputation. The stairway descended into darkness, the sound of our steps muffled by the thick layers of dust that blanketed the concrete floors. The basement was vast, its expanse stretching far beyond what we could see in the dim light of our flashlights. Old medical equipment lay scattered across the floor, remnants of a time when hope and desperation coexisted in the fight against tuberculosis. As we ventured deeper, the temperature dropped sharply, our breaths visible in the frigid air. It was here, in this subterranean maze, that the true horror of Waverly Hills awaited. We found the entrance to the death tunnels, a series of narrow passages that led to various exits throughout the city. The tunnels were claustrophobic, the walls slick with moisture and the air thick with an unsettling stillness. As we navigated the twisting corridors, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water and the occasional scurrying of unseen creatures. It was easy to imagine the echoes of footsteps and cries that must have reverberated through these tunnels during the dark days of the sanatorium. Hours passed as we explored, documenting every corner with our cameras and recording equipment. It wasn't until we reached a particularly narrow section of the tunnel that the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavier, the sulfur-like odor intensifying, making it difficult to breathe. Laura stopped, her flashlight beam flickering as she pointed to a set of fresh bloodstains leading deeper into the tunnel. My heart raced as I followed the trail, the reality of our surroundings sinking in. These were no ordinary stains, they were recent, impossibly out of place in a place abandoned for decades. As we continued, the sounds of the past seemed to come alive. Faint whispers echoed through the tunnel, their words indecipherable but filled with sorrow and fear. The flashlight beams danced across the walls, revealing fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures lurking just beyond our sight. Laura clutched my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. But just as we turned to retrace our steps, a sudden gust of wind blew through the tunnel, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled for our backup batteries, the oppressive silence now broken by the sound of a child's laughter, soft, eerie, and unmistakably human. The laughter echoed around us, bouncing off the walls and filling the tunnel with an unsettling energy. I managed to get our lights back on, the beams cutting through the darkness and revealing a horrifying sight. A translucent figure of a young child stood before us, staring blankly with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through our very souls. His presence was suffocating, the air around him growing colder with each passing second. Laura backed away, her scream caught in her throat, while I stood frozen, unable to move. "Why are you here?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The child's form flickered, his expression shifting from sorrow to anger. "Leave," he whispered, his voice echoing through the tunnel like a mournful plea. "You don't belong here." Before we could respond, the tunnel began to shake, debris falling from the ceiling as the ground beneath us trembled. The whispers turned into agonized cries, the voices of those who had perished within these walls, their anguish echoing through the tunnels. We realized then that Waverly Hills was more than just a haunted house, it was a prison for the restless souls who had lost their lives in the fight against tuberculosis, their spirits forever bound to the place they could never escape. Desperate to escape, we turned to flee, but the tunnels seemed to shift and change around us, leading us deeper into the heart of the basement. The temperature plummeted further, our breaths coming in frantic gasps as the air grew thick with the scent of decay and sorrow. The child appeared again, his form now accompanied by dozens of other ghostly figures, their eyes filled with pain and longing. In a final, desperate attempt to find a way out, I recalled the old rituals I had read about, ways to appease restless spirits and help them find peace. Summoning all my courage, I began to chant the words I had learned, my voice wavering but determined. The tunnel responded with a violent gust of wind, the figures recoiling as the energy of the ritual took hold. The child's laughter turned into a soft whimper, the spirit's cries morphing into whispers of gratitude. Slowly, the oppressive energy began to lift, the tunnels becoming less chaotic as the spirits found solace in my words. The child nodded, a gesture of thanks and release, before dissolving into the ether. The tunnel stilled, the temperature rising as the sulfur-like odor dissipated, leaving behind a profound sense of calm and closure. We found ourselves back at the entrance of the death tunnels, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by the quiet stillness of the abandoned basement. Exhausted but relieved, Laura and I made our way back upstairs, the horrors of Waverly Hills etched into our minds forever. In the days that followed, we left Louisville, the memories of our experience haunting us in ways we couldn't fully comprehend. The Winchester House, with its dark history and restless spirits, remained a symbol of the thin veil between life and death, a testament to the enduring presence of those who can never find peace. Years later, I still find myself drawn to the stories of haunted places, the lingering echoes of lives lost, and the restless spirits that wander the shadows. The experience at Waverly Hills taught me that some places carry the weight of their pasts too heavily, their dark histories etched into the very fabric of their existence. It also reminded me of the power of empathy and understanding, the ability to help those who are trapped by their own sorrow and pain. If you ever find yourself near the old Waverly Hills Hospital, tread carefully. Listen to the whispers in the shadows, honor the memories of those who came before, and approach with respect. For in the depths of its basement lies a story of loss, suffering, and the enduring hope that even the most tormented spirits can find peace. Story number 3. Echoes of the Winchester Basement. I never believed in curses or restless spirits. Growing up in the heart of Los Angeles, surrounded by the bright lights and constant motion, I thought tales of haunted houses were nothing more than elaborate stories to entertain gullible tourists. But when Laura and I stumbled upon the Winchester House in California, everything changed. The Winchester House stood majestically on a quiet street in San Jose, its Gothic architecture both awe-inspiring and foreboding. Built by Sarah Winchester, widow of the famous rifle manufacturer, the house was rumored to be haunted by the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles. The sprawling mansion, with its labyrinthine corridors and endless rooms, was designed to confuse and bewilder, a physical manifestation of Sarah's grief and guilt. We had heard the stories, tourists spoke of ghostly apparitions, eerie sounds, and a palpable sense of unease that permeated the air. As avid paranormal enthusiasts, Laura and I couldn't resist the allure of investigating such a legendary site. Renting a small apartment nearby, we spent weeks preparing, researching every detail about the Winchester House and its enigmatic history. The first night we decided to explore the basement, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and recording equipment, we descended the grand staircase that led to the heart of the mansion. The basement was vast, filled with old furniture, antique decorations, and countless nooks and crannies that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. As we ventured deeper, the temperature dropped sharply, our breaths visible in the cold air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water and the occasional creak of the house settling. It wasn't long before we began to notice the peculiar phenomena that had been whispered about for decades. Footsteps echoed through the basement, their rhythm irregular and haunting. At first, we thought it was just the house reacting to our presence, but the footsteps grew louder and more distinct, as if someone, or something, was pacing just out of sight. Laura suggested we split up to cover more ground, her voice barely masking her apprehension. I wandered towards a dimly lit corner, where old storage boxes and forgotten relics lay stacked haphazardly. As I moved my flashlight across the room, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadowy figure darting behind a large cabinet. My heart raced as I approached, but when I shone my light on the spot, there was nothing there. The room was empty, yet the sense of being watched intensified. Meanwhile, Laura was exploring another section of the basement when she stumbled upon a narrow tunnel hidden behind a bookshelf. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through, its walls damp and covered in mold. A faint, sulfur-like odor permeated the air, making her gag. Against her better judgment, she followed the tunnel, the sound of her own footsteps echoing unnervingly in the confined space. I continued my search, trying to rationalize the strange occurrences. That's when I heard it, a soft, childlike laughter echoing through the basement. The sound was both innocent and chilling, sending shivers down my spine. I followed the noise to a secluded alcove, where an old, ornate mirror stood leaning against the wall. The glass was dusty, but as I wiped it clean, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Reflected in the mirror was a pale, translucent figure of a child, staring back at me with hollow eyes. My mind raced to comprehend what I was seeing. I reached out to touch the glass, but my hand passed through the reflection, leaving a cold emptiness in its wake. The child's laughter grew louder, more insistent, as if beckoning me to join them in their eternal confinement. At that moment, Laura emerged from the tunnel, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "I found something," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's a hidden room. Something terrible happened here." We quickly regrouped, the gravity of our discovery sinking in. Retracing her steps, we found the entrance to the hidden room, a small, sealed-off space that seemed untouched by time. The door was heavy, adorned with intricate carvings that hinted at dark rituals and forbidden practices. Pushing it open, we were met with a scene straight out of a nightmare. The room was stark, dominated by a single, blood-stained table surrounded by old, rusted tools and remnants of past horrors. The walls were covered in strange symbols and blood splatters, the air thick with the metallic scent of iron. In the center stood a dusty, broken cradle, its presence haunting and sorrowful. As we stood there, the temperature plummeted, and the basement doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panic set in as the sounds of footsteps and laughter swirled around us, the spirits of the past refusing to let go of their torment. The room seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, the symbols on the walls glowing ominously under our flashlights. Determined to find answers, we began documenting everything, our hands shaking as we recorded the evidence. Suddenly, the figure of Dr. Whitaker, the mansion's original owner, materialized before us. His eyes burned with a mix of anger and sorrow, his presence overwhelming. "Why are you here?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the basement. "We came to understand," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "To uncover the truth about what happened here." Dr. Whitaker advanced towards us, his form flickering like a faulty projection. "This place is cursed," he growled. "The spirits of my victims cannot find peace, bound by the very walls of this house. You must leave, before you too become a part of its endless torment." But it was too late. The spirits converged on us, their cries of anguish filling the air as the basement transformed into a battleground of the living and the dead. Desperate to escape, we tried to flee, but the basement seemed to twist and turn, leading us deeper into its dark embrace. The laughter and footsteps became a relentless cacophony, drowning out our frantic attempts to find a way out. In a final, desperate bid for survival, I grabbed Laura's hand, pulling her towards the staircase. The spirits reached out, their icy fingers clawing at us, pulling us back into the depths of the basement. Just as we felt ourselves being dragged under, a blinding light enveloped us, and the oppressive presence lifted, releasing us from the basement's grip. Gasping for breath, we found ourselves back at the entrance, the basement door ajar once more. The horrors we had witnessed lingered in our minds, the weight of the basement's dark history pressing down on us. We fled the Winchester house that night, the echoes of laughter and footsteps haunting our every step. Leaving behind the mansion that had held us captive in its web of curses and restless spirits, we returned to our lives, forever changed by the night we uncovered the basement's dark secrets. The Winchester house stood as a silent sentinel, its mysteries remaining locked within its walls, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to fall under its spell. Years later, I still think about that night, the relentless footsteps, the child's hollow gaze, and the anguished cries that echoed through the basement. The experience taught me that some places carry the weight of their pasts too heavily, their dark histories etched into the very fabric of their existence. The Winchester house remains a testament to the thin veil between the living and the dead, a place where nightmares breathe and shadows come to life. If you ever find yourself near the Winchester house, remember our story. Approach with caution and respect, for the basement holds secrets that should never be disturbed. The spirits that reside there are not just remnants of history, they are tortured souls, forever bound by the darkness that consumes them, waiting for someone to acknowledge their suffering and help them find the peace they so desperately seek. Story number 4. Shadows in the Sulphur Basement. I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in Ohio, surrounded by the sprawling cornfields and the steady hum of small-town life, I thought tales of restless spirits and haunted basements were nothing more than local folklore. Stories parents told their kids to keep them from wandering too far after dark. But all of that changed the night our family moved into the old Whitaker place. The Whitaker house stood at the end of Maple Avenue, its Victorian architecture both grand and foreboding. The realtor had assured us it was a charming fixer-upper with ample space and historical character. My wife, Sarah, saw it as the perfect opportunity to start fresh, away from the chaos of our previous rental in Dayton. Our 2 children, Emma and Jake, were excited about the idea of having their own rooms and a backyard to explore. From the moment we stepped inside, there was an undeniable presence in the air. The house was vast, with high ceilings and large windows that framed views of the dense Ohio woods. The initial weeks were filled with the usual challenges of moving, unpacking, painting, and settling into our new routine. However, as autumn gave way to winter, subtle disturbances began to surface. It started with a strange, sulfur-like odor emanating from the basement. At first, we dismissed it as the lingering scent of old pipes or perhaps mold from the damp Ohio winters. But the smell persisted, growing stronger each day, making the basement an increasingly uninviting place. Then came the doors. It began innocently enough, doors that seemed to open and close on their own. The kitchen door would swing shut just as we were entering, and the bedroom doors would creak open when no one was around. Sarah blamed it on drafts or the settling of the old house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. One night, after tucking Emma and Jake into bed, I sat alone in the living room, trying to focus on some work. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The lights flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. That's when I heard it, a faint sound of children laughing, echoing from the basement. My heart raced as I glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was just the wind or a stray animal, but the sound was unmistakable. Gathering my courage, I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the basement door. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The sulfur odor was overpowering, filling my nostrils with its pungent scent. As I reached the bottom, I noticed something odd. The basement door was ajar, though I was certain I had closed it earlier. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open wider, the sound of laughter growing louder. I pointed my flashlight around the room, scanning for any signs of life. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and cobweb-covered appliances. The laughter seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, making it impossible to locate its source. Determined to find answers, I decided to set up a security camera in the basement. Over the next few nights, I monitored the footage, hoping to catch a rational explanation for the disturbances. What I saw when I reviewed the recording sent chills down my spine, a faint, shadowy figure moving swiftly across the room, its form barely distinguishable against the dark backdrop. The figure didn't interact with anything, just passed through the space as if it were walking through a wall. One morning, unable to contain my curiosity any longer, I approached the local library to dig into the history of our new home. The librarian, a quiet woman named Mrs. Thompson, was surprisingly helpful. She pulled out old newspaper clippings and property records, revealing a dark chapter in the Whitaker house's past. Decades ago, the house had been the residence of Dr. Harold Whitaker, a respected physician known for his pioneering work in hematology. However, his reputation took a dark turn when several patients went missing under mysterious circumstances. Rumors swirled about unethical experiments and forbidden research conducted in the basement. One particularly harsh winter, a fire broke out in the house, claiming the lives of Dr. Whitaker and his young son, Timothy. The basement, as I learned, had been the epicenter of Dr. Whitaker's illicit activities. He had created a makeshift laboratory where he conducted gruesome experiments, collecting blood samples from his patients without their consent. Timothy, a curious and sensitive child, had unknowingly witnessed his father's atrocities, leading to his untimely demise in the same basement. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home with a heavy heart. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, the temperature plummeted once more. The laughter echoed through the halls, now joined by the sound of desperate crying. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront the restless spirits of the past and bring peace to our home. I ventured into the basement, the sulfur smell thickening the air. The security camera footage played on my phone, showing the shadowy figure passing by the old laboratory area. As I approached the remnants of Dr. Whitaker's work, I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and anger. The walls were stained with old blood, and the remnants of his experiments lay scattered around. Suddenly, the room was filled with a blinding light, and the apparition of Dr. Whitaker materialized before me. His eyes burned with a malevolent intensity, and his presence exuded a palpable darkness. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed, his voice echoing through the basement. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know what you did here, Dr. Whitaker. Your experiments ended when you lost your son. Let his spirit find peace." The ghostly figure lunged at me, his form flickering like a candle in the wind. I backed away, but the basement seemed to stretch endlessly, trapping me in a nightmarish loop. The spirits of the missing patients and young Timothy surrounded me, their expressions twisted with pain and longing. Desperate to break free, I remembered the old rites I had read about in my research. I began to chant a prayer of forgiveness and release, my voice trembling but resolute. The air grew thick with energy, the spirits' cries intensifying as they felt the change. Slowly, the darkness began to lift, the spirits finding solace in my words. Dr. Whitaker's apparition let out a final, anguished scream before dissolving into the ether, his malevolent presence finally extinguished. The basement returned to its former stillness, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved, knowing that I had helped the restless souls find peace. In the days that followed, the disturbances ceased entirely. The sulfur smell dissipated, and the basement doors remained firmly closed, no longer moving on their own. Our family found a renewed sense of peace, the shadows of the past finally laid to rest. The Whitaker house, once a place of horror and despair, transformed into a home filled with love and light. We continued our lives, grateful for the chance to start anew and the lessons learned from confronting the darkness that had once threatened to consume us. Years later, as I sit in the now peaceful living room, I reflect on the ordeal that tested our family in ways we never imagined. The experience taught me that sometimes, facing the shadows of the past is the only way to move forward, and that compassion and understanding can bring even the most tormented spirits the peace they deserve. If you ever find yourself renting an old home with a hidden past, remember our story. Listen to the whispers in the walls, honor the memories of those who came before, and approach the unknown with both courage and empathy. For in the heart of every haunted place lies a story waiting to be told, and sometimes, all it takes to bring peace is someone willing to listen. Story number 5. Echoes in the Stanley Basement. I never considered myself a believer in the supernatural. Growing up in the heart of Chicago, surrounded by the relentless pace of urban life, ghosts seemed like nothing more than figments of overactive imaginations or the stuff of old wives' tales. But my perspective changed the night I stayed at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, a place infamous not just for its grandeur but also for the chilling stories that clung to its very walls. The Stanley had always fascinated me, a beacon of eerie allure that inspired Stephen King's The Shining. As a freelance writer, I thrived on unraveling mysteries and delving into the unknown, making the Stanley the perfect subject for my next project. When I secured a room on the top floor, I was eager to immerse myself in its history, to capture the essence of the legends that made it so renowned. From the moment I stepped into the lobby, there was an unmistakable sense of being watched. The grandeur of the chandelier and the ornate furnishings couldn't mask the underlying tension that seemed to permeate the air. I checked into my room, a spacious suite with large windows that offered a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains. Setting up my laptop, I began to research the hotel's past, poring over old newspaper clippings and first-hand accounts of strange occurrences. That first night was peaceful. I fell asleep to the gentle hum of the heating system, the distant sounds of the town below barely penetrating the thick walls. However, by midnight, a subtle shift occurred. I was awakened by the faint sound of children laughing, a playful, carefree sound that seemed out of place in the silent expanse of my room. Assuming it was a neighbor's child playing outside, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was nothing more than a trick of the wind or my imagination. The next morning, I shrugged off the incident and continued my research. The Stanley had a dark history, filled with tales of hauntings and unexplained phenomena. Yet, the stories always circled back to the basement, a place shrouded in mystery and fear. According to legends, the basement was once used by the hotel's owner, Horace Stanley, for dubious experiments and secret gatherings. Some claimed it was the site of occult rituals, while others believed it held the restless spirits of past guests who met untimely ends. Curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to explore the basement myself. Late that afternoon, I made my way downstairs, the dimly lit corridors echoing with the footsteps of unseen presences. The basement door was heavy, its surface scarred by years of use. Pushing it open, I descended the narrow stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was vast, filled with old furniture, discarded belongings, and an overwhelming sense of desolation. As I ventured deeper, the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the frigid air. The sound of my footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. I reached the heart of the basement, where an old, unused elevator stood as a relic of a bygone era. The children's laughter echoed once more, louder and more distinct this time, sending chills down my spine. I followed the sound, my flashlight flickering as it struggled against the darkness. Rounding a corner, I stumbled upon a small, dimly lit room that I hadn't noticed in my initial exploration. The door was slightly ajar, and the laughter was emanating from within. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open, revealing a scene that stopped me in my tracks. Inside was a collection of old toys, dolls with cracked faces, worn-out teddy bears, and tiny wooden blocks scattered across the floor. In the center stood a dusty, antique rocking chair, gently swaying back and forth despite the lack of any visible force. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker uncontrollably, casting erratic shadows that danced across the room. The laughter intensified, now accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I felt a presence, a heavy weight pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. My flashlight flickered violently, momentarily plunging the room into darkness before stabilizing again. In the brief moments of darkness, I thought I saw a figure standing in the corner, an indistinct shadow with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, only to feel an invisible force pulling me towards the rocking chair. My mind raced for an explanation, but rational thought failed me as the supernatural elements became undeniable. Desperate to escape, I turned to flee, but the basement seemed to warp around me, the walls closing in as if the very structure was alive and intent on trapping me. The whispers grew louder, the voices of long-dead children pleading for help, their cries echoing through the cold air. The rocking chair stopped moving, and the room fell silent once more, the oppressive atmosphere lifting just enough for me to breathe. I stumbled out of the basement, gasping for air, my heart still racing from the encounter. The rest of my stay at the Stanley was a blur of sleepless nights and constant fear of returning to that basement. I documented everything, determined to make sense of what I had experienced, but the more I tried to understand, the deeper the mystery seemed to grow. After checking out of the hotel, I returned to Chicago, the memories of the Stanley lingering in my mind like a persistent shadow. I published my findings, detailing the eerie experiences and the unsettling history of the basement. The story garnered attention, drawing interest from paranormal enthusiasts and skeptics alike. But the true nature of the basement's hauntings remained elusive, a testament to the Stanleys' enduring legacy of fear and fascination. Years later, I still ponder the events that unfolded in that basement. Was it the restless spirit of Horace Stanley, forever bound to his sinister experiments? Or were the voices the echoes of innocent lives lost to his dark ambitions? The truth remains shrouded in mystery, a haunting reminder that some places carry the weight of their past, their secrets hidden in the shadows of forgotten corridors. If you ever find yourself at the Stanley Hotel, heed my warning. The basement is more than just a space of old furniture and discarded memories, it's a gateway to a darker realm where the past refuses to stay buried. Listen closely, and you might hear the laughter of children and the whispers of those who can no longer find peace, their stories etched into the very foundation of the hotel, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover the truth. Story number 6. The Blood Bank beneath Pennsylvania. Moving to Pennsylvania was supposed to be a fresh start. After years of bustling city life in New York, Laura and I craved the tranquility of a quieter town, a place where we could build our lives without the constant hum of traffic and the impersonal anonymity of skyscrapers. When we stumbled upon the old Victorian house on Maple Street, with its charming facade and affordable price, it seemed like the perfect retreat. The house was a character in itself, standing proudly with its ornate wooden trims and large bay windows that framed picturesque views of the surrounding woods. Inside, it was spacious and filled with the warmth of sunlight streaming through the windows during the day. We spent our weekends renovating, restoring its former glory, and making it our own. Little did we know, the house harbored secrets that would soon unravel our peace. A few months into our stay, strange occurrences began to disturb our nights. It started with minor inconveniences. Doors creaked open on their own, lights flickered without cause, and objects seemed to move when we weren't looking. At first, we dismissed these as quirks of an old house, easily fixed or ignored. However, the disturbances grew more unsettling as time went on. One particularly cold October night, Laura awoke to the sound of dripping water. Confused, she followed the noise to the kitchen, only to find the faucet running despite having turned it off earlier. As she dried her hands, she noticed a trail of wet footprints leading down the hallway and into the basement. My heart raced as I joined her, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. The basement door was heavy, its wooden surface scarred by time and neglect. Pushing it open, we descended the narrow stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was vast, far larger than the main floors suggested, filled with old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten relics of the house's past. What caught our attention were the dark, sticky stains on the concrete floor, bloodstains that glistened ominously under the flashlight's beam. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, a chilling reminder of a time long gone. Determined to uncover the source of these stains, we began searching the basement. Hidden behind old cabinets and beneath layers of dust, we discovered a small, sealed-off room. The door was padlocked, its key missing, but the faint sounds of children crying and muffled voices seeped through the cracks. Laura's hand shook as she reached for the door, her breath visible in the icy air. "Maybe it's just the wind," I suggested, trying to steady my nerves. But Laura wasn't convinced. "No, there's something here. We need to know what happened." After days of searching and piecing together old records from the local library, we uncovered the house's dark history. In the late 1800s, the house had been the residence of Dr. Henry Whitaker, a respected physician known for his pioneering work in hematology. However, whispers of his unethical practices haunted his legacy. It was rumored that Dr. Whitaker conducted gruesome experiments, collecting blood from his patients without consent, believing he could unlock the secrets of life itself. One fateful night, tragedy struck. A devastating fire broke out in the house, consuming everything in its path. The records were murky, with conflicting accounts about what truly happened. Some said it was an accident, others whispered about foul play. The house was abandoned for years, its dark past lingering in the shadows, until we decided to breathe new life into it. With this knowledge weighing heavily on us, we returned to the basement, determined to open the sealed room. Laura found an old, rusted key hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Her hands trembled as she inserted it into the lock, the metallic click echoing through the silent basement. The door creaked open, revealing the room beyond. Inside, the space was small and claustrophobic, illuminated by a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were stained with dried blood, and old medical instruments lay scattered on a wooden table. In the corner stood a dusty, worn crib, its presence incongruous in the macabre setting. The air was heavy with sorrow and fear, and the faint sound of children crying grew louder, more desperate. As we stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness save for the dim light. Shadows seemed to dance on the walls, their movements synchronized with the haunting cries. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the bulb, leaving us in pitch blackness. Panic set in as we fumbled for our flashlights, the beam revealing ghostly apparitions hovering in the corners of the room. Figures of children, their eyes hollow and filled with despair, reached out towards us with translucent hands. Their cries echoed through the space, a cacophony of pain and longing. Laura clutched my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice shaking. But as we turned to exit, the door wouldn't budge. The spirits closed in, their presence suffocating, as if we were being pulled deeper into their anguish. The room seemed to warp around us, the walls closing in, the cries turning into wails of pure agony. In a desperate attempt to calm the spirits, I began to speak softly, offering apologies and asking for forgiveness. "We're sorry for disturbing you. We didn't know. Please, let us help you find peace." The room's atmosphere shifted, the spirits' hostility easing as they listened to our pleas. The cries softened, the apparitions flickering with a glimmer of hope. Slowly, the door began to unlock, the barrier between our world and theirs weakening. The children's shadows faded, their presence transforming from torment to tranquility. As the last of the spirits dissipated, the room filled with a warm, comforting light. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. Exhausted but relieved, Laura and I exited the basement, the door closing softly behind us. In the days that followed, the disturbances ceased entirely. The house felt lighter, the air filled with a newfound sense of calm. We continued our renovations, determined to honor the spirits we had encountered by restoring the house to its former beauty. The basement, once a place of horror and despair, became a symbol of our resilience and compassion. We cleaned the bloodstains, ensuring that the dark history was not forgotten but acknowledged and respected. The crib was placed back in its corner, a reminder of the lives lost and the need for healing. Years have passed since that harrowing winter, and the house on Maple Street stands as a testament to the enduring power of empathy and understanding. Laura and I built our lives within its walls, the memories of the spirits lingering as a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the supernatural. We became advocates for preserving the histories of old homes, ensuring that the stories of those who came before us are never forgotten. If you ever find yourself renting an old house with a hidden past, remember our story. Approach with respect and empathy, for behind every haunted wall lies a tale of pain and longing. Sometimes, the most terrifying shadows are born from the depths of human suffering, and only through compassion can we hope to dispel the darkness that lingers. Story number 7. Shadows Beneath Amityville. I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in the heart of Chicago, surrounded by the relentless pace of city life, the idea of spirits lingering in the shadows seemed more like a plot from a bad horror movie than reality. But everything changed the night Laura and I moved into the infamous Amityville house in upstate New York. The allure of Amityville was undeniable. Priced inexplicably low for its location, the house stood as a relic of a bygone era, its Victorian architecture both charming and eerie. The stories were enough to give anyone pause, tales of the Lutz family's terrifying experiences, unexplained phenomena, and the sinister history that clung to the property like ivy on its walls. Laura, always the adventurous one, was captivated by the challenge of restoring the old place to its former glory. I, on the other hand, viewed it as the perfect opportunity to escape the monotony of our lives and start anew. Our first few weeks were uneventful. We unpacked our belongings, painted the walls, and slowly began to breathe life back into the neglected house. The neighborhood was quiet, the close-knit community welcoming us with cautious smiles and hushed whispers about the house's dark past. I dismissed their concerns as mere superstition, attributing any strange occurrences to the natural quirks of an old building. But as autumn gave way to winter, the atmosphere in the house began to change. It started with small things, doors left ajar, objects misplaced, and the constant feeling of being watched. Laura laughed it off, suggesting we were both just overly stressed from the renovations. I tried to convince myself the same, but deep down, a gnawing unease took root. One evening, as I was working late in the living room, the lights flickered ominously. I brushed it off as a power surge, attributing it to the old wiring. However, the flickering persisted, becoming more frequent and erratic. Laura mentioned hearing footsteps in the hallway above, though she was alone in her bedroom. My skepticism began to waver as the unexplained events continued to escalate. The true horror unveiled itself one frigid December night. Laura and I had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day of repairs. As the clock struck midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of soft crying emanating from the living room. My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize the noise, perhaps a neighbor's child playing outside, or the wind howling through the gaps in the windows. Summoning my courage, I crept out of bed and approached the source of the sound. The living room was plunged in darkness, the only light coming from the dim glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. As I stepped closer, the crying grew louder, more distinct and unmistakably childlike. My skin crawled with fear, every instinct urging me to flee, yet curiosity held me in place. Suddenly, the room was illuminated by the harsh glare of the overhead light, snapping me back to reality. There was no one there, no child in sight. I stood frozen, trying to steady my racing heart. Laura emerged from the hallway, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "It's not just us anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. I saw her. Before I could respond, the temperature in the room plummeted, my breath visible in the icy air. The feeling of being watched intensified, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. I reached out to Laura, but her hand was gone, replaced by a chilling emptiness. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to investigate the house's history. Days turned into nights as I delved into old records, newspapers, and local archives. What I discovered painted a grim picture. The house had been the site of numerous unexplained deaths and disappearances over the decades, each incident more tragic than the last. Most disturbingly, there was a secret room in the basement, a room that had been sealed off and forgotten, hidden behind a false wall. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to confront whatever malevolent force haunted our home. One stormy night, I made my way to the basement, the air thick with tension and foreboding. The basement was cold and damp, the scent of mildew and decay hanging heavily in the air. As I approached the wall where the secret room was rumored to be, the lights began to flicker again, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I located the hidden door, its surface marred by years of neglect. With a deep breath, I pried it open, revealing a narrow passageway that led to a small, windowless room. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging the space into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom and revealing the macabre scene before me. The room was adorned with strange symbols etched into the walls, their meanings lost to time. In the center stood a worn-out crib, its mattress stained and tattered. Old, broken toys lay scattered around, remnants of a child's forgotten playthings. The air was thick with sorrow, and the oppressive presence of countless spirits seemed to press down on me, their silent screams echoing in my mind. Suddenly, the door slammed shut again, and the room was filled with the sound of children laughing, a hollow, mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. The symbols on the walls began to glow with an unholy light, and the crying I had heard before transformed into anguished wails. Shadows coalesced into figures, their forms twisted and contorted by pain and rage. In the midst of the chaos, a ghostly apparition materialized before me, a woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. Her voice echoed through the room, a haunting plea that resonated with my very soul. "Help us," she cried, her voice filled with despair. "Release us from this torment." Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached out, desperate to offer comfort. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of her suffering. "I want to help you." The apparition extended her hand, and as our fingers touched, a surge of energy coursed through me. Visions of past tragedies flooded my mind, families torn apart, lives lost to madness and despair, rituals performed in desperate attempts to communicate with the other side. It became clear that the secret room had been the site of dark ceremonies, an attempt to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, but instead, it had only bound the spirits to the house in eternal torment. Determined to break the cycle, I vowed to put an end to the haunting. I spent the following days researching ancient rituals and seeking guidance from local spiritualists. Armed with knowledge and determination, I returned to the basement one final time, ready to perform the ceremony that could free the trapped souls and restore peace to our home. As I began the ritual, the room responded with a fury of lights and shadows. The spirits wailed in anguish, their forms twisting and contorting in agony. I chanted the incantations, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. The temperature dropped further, and the air was thick with the cries of the tormented. Suddenly, a blinding light enveloped the room, and I felt a powerful force pushing against me, as if the spirits were resisting my efforts to free them. But I pressed on, fueled by empathy and a deep sense of responsibility. The symbols on the walls began to fade, their power weakening as the spirits found the strength to let go. One by one, the apparitions dissipated, their sorrowful cries transforming into whispers of gratitude. The woman from before appeared once more, her expression now serene and at peace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm to my traumatized soul. "You have set us free." As the last of the spirits vanished, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a profound sense of calm and closure. The secret room seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the dark energy that had once permeated its walls now replaced by a gentle stillness. Laura and I left Amityville shortly after, unable to stay in a place that had witnessed so much suffering and despair. The memories of those harrowing nights lingered, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the supernatural. We moved to a new city, hoping to leave the shadows of Amityville behind us, but the experience left an indelible mark on our souls. Years later, I still find myself drawn to stories of haunted places and restless spirits, seeking to understand the mysteries that lie beyond our perception. The Amityville house remains a symbol of the enduring struggle between light and darkness, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. If you ever find yourself venturing into the heart of Amityville or any place with a dark past, remember our story. Approach with respect and empathy, for behind every haunting lies a tale of pain and a longing for peace. Sometimes, the most terrifying shadows are born from the depths of human suffering, and only through compassion can we hope to dispel the darkness that lingers.